Okay, so now that I have the truck on the road, I'm gonna start taking care of tuning it. I selected the Edelbrock 650 CFM carb based on some calculations for the engine size, but I'm still not 100% sure if the jetting is correct and if it's burning properly. So I went on Facebook Marketplace and picked up a wideband O2 sensor with a gauge. So I'm gonna weld the bung onto the exhaust, get the gauge and get the O2 sensor installed with the gauge, and then just monitor it at different RPM to see if I need to change the jets, how it's reacting, and get the tune down. So this is the O2 sensor setup. It's an Innovate Motorsports setup, so it comes with a nice gauge here and O2 sensor, a little computer. I took a nut and just cleaned it up, getting it ready to weld it on there. So I'm just gonna put this right after the collector on the exhaust, and then I'll be able to monitor my air-fuel ratio and see if I need to change the jets on the car. So I chose this location because of how close it was to the collector and how tight it was to the engine. But once I drilled the hole, I realized that welding this piece on there was going to be pretty difficult with the exhaust installed. And even seeing where I wanted to weld the bung, I had to use a mirror to look into the hole to make sure I was lined up correctly. So it was a little bit difficult welding it in, but I managed to get it welded up really well. So if I was going to do this again, I might have chosen a slightly different location, but it worked out pretty good. So I'm happy with the way it turned out. Okay, so I got it welded on there pretty good. So now I'm going to mount the O2 sensor in the bung, route the wires into the cab, and figure out the wiring for the gauge and the sensor. All right, so I finally got the sensor installed on the truck. So now I'm gonna go through the wiring of the actual computer there and the gauge. So it's a switched power wire, ground wire, and then a few other things. And there's just some calibration to do. And then connect the gauge, and I'm gonna test it out. Okay, so now I'm going to calibrate it, connect the ground, and then okay, so I got everything wired up. There's a little LED here, and so there's a little LED here and a little momentary switch. It's used for calibration. All this is just temporary. I'm not planning on keeping the wideband in there after it's all tuned up. So now I have to switch on the power supply. So that's going to be with the key, and wait 20 seconds. Switch it off, connect the sensor. Okay. All right. Okay, now connect the sensor. Okay, now switch it on. So the LED was supposed to come on right here. So once I realized that it wasn't coming on, I had to kind of go back and retest everything to see why it wasn't actually coming on. Very strange. Okay, so I just tested the power and grounds and everything, and it appears that this momentary switch is bad. So I'm gonna switch it out with another one and restart the testing. Okay, so it's a little bit difficult to see, but the LED light is now lit up and solid. So that means that the unit is operating correctly. So now I'm going to wire in the gauge, and I'll probably just mount it beside this oil pressure gauge or something, I'm not sure yet. Okay, so I got the gauge all wired in here. So when I turn the key on, the gauge is lighting up, LED is blinking. So as the sensor warms up, that should get to about 20, I think. Yeah, okay. So I think that's good. All right, so I'm gonna go for drive, monitor that, and that'll tell me how much unburned oxygen there is in the tailpipe, and I'll be able to figure out if I have the right jets or not. Alright, so here is the first startup after getting the wideband O2 sensor installed. The instructions were pretty good, and I learned a lot installing it. And so I'm only going to have this gauge temporarily while I'm tuning the truck to make sure it's running good. So when I first started up, I was running pretty rich, which the engine's cold, that's to be expected. But then even while I'm driving around, cruising around, I'm still sitting at around 11.5 to 12, somewhere in there. So I'm going to need to change the needles and the jets. So I'm going to pick up a kit for that, and I'll make a new video going through how I learned how to tune this Edelbrock carb. But and sorry, I did a terrible job holding the camera on the gauge when I was cruising around there. So anyhow, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.